The Last Word with Matt Cooper.
Today FM.
It all happens here.
Today FM.
It does seem that one of the things we may be able to look forward to is an extra bank holiday for everybody. An extra day. We have Laura Byrne, Assistant News Editor with the Journal.ie with us. But first, Jeremy Dixon, broadcaster and co-host of the Opinions Matter podcast. We are behind the rest of the European Union when it comes to bank holidays, but there are people arguing that those who most deserve it will end up working on the additional bank holiday.
That's always the problem, isn't it? That bank holidays are not for everybody, and some people who've always had bank holidays off take it for granted, and they always assume that when it's a bank holiday, everybody is off, and that's certainly not the case.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't even be calling it a bank holiday. That's an old-fashioned
term.
It's a public holiday.
Yes, yeah. It's just bank holidays. It's ingrained.
It's just part of it, yeah.
Yeah, because there used to be a time when it was only the banks that were closed. But there are people who have always taken bank holidays for granted, probably yourselves included. I'm sure you get bank holidays off, do you?
I do.
Oh, yeah.
The last word is not on public holidays. Exactly.
Yes, So, and I've never worked on a bank holiday myself, but there's lots of people in hospitality and stuff like that do work, people in retail that work in bank holidays. This whole thing is one big mess, in my opinion, the whole payouts. We just discussed it on our podcast a half an hour ago, and it's causing more division than anything else because...
So this idea of the additional payments for the public sector workers.
Yes, oh my God, because, we were talking to a bus driver who was saying, well, we need to be included in this because I was driving people to hospitals every day. And then someone texted in and said, well, my husband's a mechanic in Donnybrook bus station. His bus wouldn't have run if my husband hadn't fixed his bus. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. I think actually the public holiday would probably be a better option because we do spend more money on a public holiday, don't we? Because we're doing things.
Laura Byrne, would people be mollified, do you think, by the idea that everybody would just get an extra day's public holiday each year?
Well, as you say, Matt, there was all sorts of kite flying this week, all sorts of talk of extra holidays, bank holidays, frontline workers, who qualifies, and you've covered that there. But, I mean, we had the chief executive of ISME out today, Neil McDonald, saying there's a whiff of 2006 off all of this. There's very much the feeling of bank holidays for everyone, pay rises for everyone. But, we have a budget coming up and we've just gotten through a pandemic and someone has to pay for all of this. And the point has been made that, it has to come out of the tax. And, if you start with frontline workers, then, as you say, where do you go to after that? You have to go to people working in supermarkets. I think most people after the pandemic would agree that people who sat with elderly and dying patients who had no family members with them, people who walked the wards all sorts of day and night, they did step in and do a hugely important job. I'm not saying that anyone else who did essential work wasn't important, but, there is
a definition of what's essential work because, if you're employed by the HSE, does that automatically mean that you were doing that type of work, because you could have been involved in administration, back office work.
Well, exactly. You could be working as a clerk on the front line. The Taoiseach is in New York this week, of course, and he did say that a one-off bonus to recognise the frontline workers is being discussed. And I would imagine we're looking at something along those lines rather than the public holiday. Now, the government did discuss public holidays right through the pandemic, and maybe with the discussion around 4-day week coming up, maybe that's the easy answer for them. I think if they start looking at certain sectors and saying that we'll pay those and we won't pay those, they're in for a bit of trouble.
Yeah, that's not going to work. As I'm just thinking, as Laura was saying that. You say, for instance, you say everybody that works in a hospital gets this extra payment. Can you compare somebody who was working in ICU through the whole pandemic to Joanne, who was working in accounts in the hospital? No, I'm not dissing her job, but I'm saying she wasn't in an ICU unit looking after people. She wasn't having to hold an iPad up to a person dying with COVID to say goodbye to the families. And it's just going to create a them and us situation. I just think it's going to divide people even more. And where do you draw the line? And as Laura's saying, there's lots of kite flying going on this week, and that's not really what we should be doing. In fairness, though, I haven't heard one bit of commentary from anybody saying that frontline workers shouldn't get a payment. So that's a positive, I think.
Okay, let's move on. And something that's happening in the UK, but I think would be of interest here in Ireland, because there have been efforts, I think, to bring in legislation to help restaurant workers and bar and cafe workers to make sure that they get their tips. Because, Laura Byrne, it has struck me that as we have gone to almost a cashless society, are an awful lot of workers potentially missing out on the cash tips that they would have got. And even if you were to add your 12.5% or 15% or whatever it is you want to add onto your bill, can you be guaranteed that the owners will hand it over to the staff?
This is it, Matt. I mean, we're all starting to eat out again. And if we're lucky, we're getting out to do that. And, you know, in the UK, they realised that many restaurant, bar and cafe owners weren't actually giving the money that they were getting when someone paid by card, and they were paying, let's say, the 12 to 15%. I think anecdotally here, the suggestion was that you always needed to give a tip in cash because you might feel that maybe the money mightn't trickle down to the staff. And there have been a couple of reports along the way of similar here. So what they're doing in the UK is they're going to make it illegal for companies to do this. Many businesses had added discretionary service charges to their customers' bills, and some were found to be taking the tips and actually paying the managers' salaries with it. So, I mean, they have very definite proof that this was happening. And I think it's a really important step forward. It's clear after the pandemic, and as we just mentioned, so many people have suffered. The people in this industry have been absolutely really destroyed in the last year. And the idea that people on a very low income serving you for your dinner, if you like to give them a tip, which is really hard to do when you don't have cash. I don't know about you, but I never have cash on me anymore, not even coins anymore.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to do that with your card, at least you feel that it's going to them and it's well deserved. So it would be interesting to see if there'd be a similar move here.
Of course, Jeremy, also then there are some restaurants that put on a sort of a mandatory service charge, which can be very annoying, particularly if you haven't had good service. And then you have to work out whether you want to add a little bit more onto the mandatory charge, and you're still wondering, well, will the waiters get it, the staff get it?
I have a big issue with that. There's several restaurants that I regularly go to that have a service charge, a mandatory service charge on it. And I always feel that I have to give a tip on top of the service charge because you know that the service charge isn't going to the staff. It's subsidising the low wages that they're on. And it's a cop-out by these restaurants to actually add a service charge. So you end up, if the service charge on a meal is, for argument's sake, €100, and the service charge on top of that is €15, so you're paying 115. You're going to end up having to put another tenner on top of that as well to pay, because the waitresses or waiters done a good job. And I think it's service charges that need to be scrapped. But it's something Laura just mentioned I never even thought of. And subconsciously, I'm going to be more aware of it now, is that we aren't carrying cash anymore. And that's not good for people in the service industry. Even down to, you know, the old story of someone going up to the bar and buying a drink, and they buy a pint for $3.70, and they say to the barman, keep the change, and they give them $4. That's not happening anymore because we're tapping. Everybody is tapping. And I think in the next 2 years we probably will be a cashless society. The fact that my mother is in her 70s and she turned around to me the other day and said, no, cash is king as far as she's concerned. I think she has money under her mattress.
She's probably right.
Yeah, but she turned around to me the other day and she says, what's that Revolution thing on your phone? I says it's Revolut, ma'am. How do I get one of those? Because cash is dirty. You don't know what germs are on it. So if my mother in her 70s is... Now, I didn't set up the Revolut for her because she'd be ringing me every day asking me how to use it. But if you have people in their 70s who want to set up Revolut, I think that's where we're going.
Some of your comments have been, men, we're also working all the way through the pandemic. We didn't get bank holidays off, and most of our crews have caught COVID during the pandemic, and we're private sector. Another one says, oh, boo-hoo, we all suffered. It's the job the frontline workers chose, like marriage, for better or for worse. And I take it that means that, listener, that you don't believe they should be getting some extra money. Another one says the service charge is fine as long as it goes to the staff. It removes the question of tipping, and everyone knows the final amount owed, but tipping on top is not on. Are we really going to follow the awful American model where people have to rely on tips for their income? That's from Eamon in Kilkenny. Tapping all the time leads it to being harder to track money spent. Before, if you took out €300 cash and then checked your wallet and it's spent, then at least you knew it was gone. Serious potential for spending money you can't afford on a night out when only tapping the card. Okay, 0874 100 102 gives you the last word by text or by WhatsApp. Laura Byrne, tell us about Linda Evangelista's troubles, the former supermodel.
Yeah, Matt. Most people over the age of 30 anyway would remember Linda Evangelista. She's one of the original 1990 supermodels, herself Kate Moss, Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, many of whom are still looking amazing and still show up on the catwalk. They would have, she was the one who coined the phrase, "I never get out of bed for less than 10,000, which probably seems a bit, it was paltry sum at this stage. But, they were the first real supermodels as we would have understood it. And I saw her post on Instagram the other night. She came out and said that she had a terrible time after a procedure, a plastic surgery procedure called cool sculpting. And this involves freezing fat on the body and is supposed to kind of remove some fat. And apparently it had the opposite effect, which is a rare side effect. And she has now developed this paradoxical adipose hyperplasia. You'd be forgiven for not knowing what that means, but she said it has destroyed her livelihood, has sent her into a cycle of deep depression, profound sadness, and the lowest depths of self-loathing. It was a really moving post, and she has had lots of support and, desperately unfair. I feel, though, if she is a recluse, she's probably better off staying that way for a while, because I can only imagine that the tabloids must be tripping over one another to try and get a photo of what she actually does look like at the moment. I know that the Daily Mail had followed her through an airport, I think last year, and suggested that she had put on weight or whatever it was. So look, obviously something went wrong and she's suffered because of it. I know her former colleagues, they've all been lauded as still gracing the catwalks. It's a really difficult business to be in. It'll be interesting to see what the debate around plastic surgery, though, will be after this,
Okay, let's move on. Johnny Depp says he's the victim of cancel culture, Jeremy Dixon, as he receives a reward in recognition of his acting career.
Yes, I heard his speech at the film festival there, and he sounded, I don't know if any of you heard it, but he sounded like a broken man as he was talking about this. This
is on the back of the legal action involving the libel action he took because of what his wife Amber Heard, his ex-wife, said. An action which, of course, he lost. Yeah,
it's been it's been very nasty for both of them, and the fact that it was all aired in public is just horrible. I found that whole case just horrific, because they were talking about very intimate details of the relationship, which should never have made it into the press. But in his statement, in his press statement, where he was sitting in the press conference, he said that cancel culture, while when it started out it had good intentions, which I believe it probably did, that it's gone too far now. And he said something very sobering at the end of it. He said to all the people in the room listening to him, he says, if you think that you're above cancel culture, you're not. It can happen to any of us. I hate cancel culture. I really do. I think it's one of the worst things that has happened in recent years. I've been a victim of cancel culture. I've been cancelled more times than a Ryanair flight, and that's the truth.
How do you mean by that?
I've been cancelled. Well, not successfully cancelled, obviously, or I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be doing the other jobs I do. But for saying things that, why can people not just take it that we don't all agree nowadays on things? And I've even seen people trying to cancel you, Matt. I can't even remember, about a year ago, it got out that you were going to have, I can't even remember who it was, but you were going to have some guest on this show, okay? And it got out on Twitter that you were going to have a guest on the show. And I remember going onto Twitter that evening because I was bored, and I said, Matt will give me a bit of entertainment. And people were tweeting you saying, how dare you have that person on as a guest? You should be sacked from Today FM and all this, trying to cancel you because they didn't.
You know what? I don't even remember that. There must have been loads of people I muted who were trying to cancel me. I have no recollection of it.
Just to counter this, I mean, Jeremy, we all agree, and I think most rational people agree, that social media has removed nuance and balance, yes. And everybody's shouting at everyone else. Yep. And there's no question that, it isn't the healthiest environment for public discourse. However, Hollywood has always had an issue with the cover-up of abuse. We have Harvey Weinstein, Roman Polanski, and, it has sort of been at the forefront of the Me Too movement. Nobody likes cancel culture, but also, a judge at a high court did say that the allegations around the Johnny Depp case were substantially correct. So he can't, be in the courts in this kind of context and then expect that his career won't take a dive. So there is a sort of a happy medium here, the wrong phrase.
Yeah, but I'm a firm believer that people should not go by the court of social media, and unfortunately that's what happens 100%, now. And even down to cancel culture about boycotting different businesses. If somebody now, the way it is now, if somebody has a bad service in a shop or something like that, they immediately take to Twitter and, they put up a photograph of the shop and they'll tag the shop in it and they go, I had a really bad service in this shop. You should all boycott the shop. And you're only ever hearing one side of the story. Now, I take it the Johnny Depp situation, it's more complicated than what we're talking about. But people need to stop paying attention to... Because all I believe, cancel culture on Twitter, it's just noise and it should be ignored.
Okay, well
it's
then,
just noise.
Let's take a fictional character, James Bond, because there's going to be an enormous amount of publicity next week for the new movie, No Time to Die. And there were people who think that James Bond should be cancelled because even the new director says that he was basically a rapist in his early films. And now you also have a lot of people arguing that it shouldn't be James Bond of the future, it should be Jane Bond.
Oh, dear.
What do we know, dear?
That's we've reached peak wokeness, haven't we, in 2021. I don't even know where this James Bond should be a woman has even come from, because where it started. Somebody must have said it jokingly in a bar one night, and then it just snowballed from there. There's no appetite for a female James Bond. They made a female version of Ghostbusters 2 years ago, and it tanked. It absolutely tanked. If they want to bring out a series of movies with a female, Jason Bourne, Joanne Bourne, if they want to do that, the Joanne Bourne ultimatum, there's absolutely nothing stopping them doing that. But James Bond is a man, and nothing can change that.
Can I argue, Jeremy, that women maybe don't want to see a female James Bond, because let's be honest, that character has never been a paragon of virtue. We've had to deal with, Pussy Galore, Honey Rider, and all of these horrendous sort of misogynistic names over the years. I think, a strong female character would do a lot better in a separate role. I think, look, Daniel Craig, it sort of backfired. He just suggested this week in an interview that he didn't think James Bond should be played by a woman. And given that the new film is out next week, it's worked into a nice story. I mean, we have a piece tonight on the Journal by a psychiatrist who suggests that James Bond, the character, is indeed a psychopath, and he's not the first to suggest it. It's a really interesting character. He's come through generations. I don't think it has done much for women, but there's some new writers in this one. This might be a nice, interesting
I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge has written a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
Yes, so it'd be interesting to see what she does with it.
But you look at interviews that Honor Blackman did over the years, and Honor Blackman, of course, played Pussy Galore in Goldfinger. I'm a huge James Bond fan, always have been. And she herself was asked many, many times, were you objectified in that role? And she said, absolutely not. Now, who better to give an opinion on it than Pussy Galore herself? But I think the female characters in James Bond movies have changed over the years. I was watching a couple of the older ones, some of the Roger Moore ones there in the last couple of weeks, where the women were basically, they did nothing. They were just there as eye candy, and they had nothing to do with the plot. That's not the case in the Daniel Craig James Bond movie. So we have moved on, and the women in these movies do play a more important part. We just have to stop looking at things that happened in the past with a modern lens. You can't look at Goldfinger with a 2021 lens.
Listener says, would it be okay if Jane Bond got her men into bed? Laura, you can be sure then that there would be people accusing Jane Bond of being a slut, wouldn't you?
See, you can't win.
You can't win. Okay, well, basically, let's hear a little bit of an audio we played last night, but I want to play it again. Boris Johnson at the United Nations.
And when Kermit the Frog sang, "It's not easy being green." Do you remember that one? I want you to know that he was wrong. He was wrong. It is easy. It's not only easy, it's lucrative, and it's right to be green. Although he was also unnecessarily rude to Miss Piggy, I thought, Kermit the Frog. And when Kermit the Frog...
It went down like a lead balloon, didn't it? Talk about misreading your audience. They
weren't what a muppet.
They weren't all half pissed at the end of a sort of an after-dinner speech that they were getting.
Sorry,
Laura.
go ahead, Laura.
Well, I was just saying, you can insert the obvious joke about the Muppets arriving at the UN General Assembly, but I can't work out if Boris is either really clever or really stupid. I'm guessing it's the latter, because having said that, we're still all talking about him today. But we really are in the era of the idiot, with so many massive issues going on globally and so many opportunities to make a statement in front of your hundreds of peers from the world stage, and he starts talking about the Muppets about.
And is Kermit
just unreal.
Is Kermit universally known, or
not at all?
No, I wouldn't have thought he is universal. I don't think even Australians know who Kermit is, do they?
They'd have had the Muppets in Australia.
Would they?
Yeah, come on, in the movies they would have come on.
But like, say, 15 years ago, the Kermit would have been sort of out there and there were still
Yeah.
Muppet movies. I'm not even sure anyone under 21 knows Kermit, do they? Not that I can imagine.
No, excuse me. My son is 7 and loves the Cookie Monster, so he does love the. There's Sesame Street, but it's all the
Just
same thing.
some messages to finish. Can you imagine the outrage if Ripley from Aliens was recast as a man in a reboot? Why can't the permanently outraged just let James Bond be a man, says Colin. And the rumour, another listener says, is that Phoebe Waller-Bridge is going to be the next Indiana Jones. Thank you very much, Laura Byrne from the Journal.ie and Jeremy Dixon from the Opinions Matter podcast for being with us here on The Last Word of Today FM.
The Last Word with Matt Cooper.
Weekdays from 4:30.
Today